Hi, this is Justin. I'm here with Josias in Brazil. We're pairing on screen here, and I'm going to go over with Josias how to use iterators and generator functions because we're using Redux-saga, and it's absolutely critical that you have a good understanding of this. I've got an article on the Shaka Code forum that explains this. The key thing to understanding iterators and generator functions is understanding the concept that there's going to be some code that is going to be interacting with your generator function. It's going to get the iterator. So you're going to get an iterator and you're basically going to be calling next. Next can take a parameter and it's going to return some value. So how the heck does this actually working in real life? Let's take a look at this. I've got an example here. So in this example, we're just running this function called the controller. The controller here, if we were let's just say, for example, we were running Redux-saga. Redux-saga, this is a code that Redux-saga is running inside of Redux-saga, and this would be the code that you're writing, this generator. So your generator, it's a special function. Notice it's got the function star. So when you've got a function star, that means that this function always returns a iterator. Whatever's inside this function is just some different stuff. It's got its own meaning, and it sort of is going to be really foreign if you're familiar to regular JavaScript, because this code doesn't run when you call generator. What happens is you get back the iterator to the generator code. Are you with me so far, Josias?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any questions on what I just did?
Not yet.
Okay. So what I've got on the right-hand side is a very explicit debugging statements. And the best way to understand this is to actually go through this code yourself and play around with the print statements and see what actually happens. So what I'm going to do here, I've got an idea actually. I'm going to comment this out and uncomment this so that we can actually see what happens as the controller gets and does more stuff. It's not really necessary to comment out what's in the generator because you'll see the controller is the part that's doing it. Okay, let's see how this goes. So Josias, when I run this code, what do you think is going to get? What do you think is going to print?
Well, the first line in the controller function.
First line of the controller function. Obviously not the generator because we're not calling it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's run this. Running the controller, about to call the generator. It's good so far, right?
Yeah.
Okay, next one. Let's call the generator. Now, are we going to get this line of code before the yield, the very beginning of the generator call?
I don't think so.
Let's see. So we clear this out, we'll run it again. Like, whoa, what happened? Okay, we got this iterator object. Let's actually look here and look at what's in this iterator, console.log iterator. Okay, so the iterator's got all this stuff in here. It doesn't really look so great. Let's see if I take a look here in JavaScript. Let's clear that out. Let's run this again. And you see here, it's returned the, this is the iterator function right there. So it's a generator, but it's not, it's a function. It's what it is. You can do stuff. It's a generator object, and it's got a function there. And the main thing is it's got this next. That's the key thing that we're going to be using.
Mm-hmm.
I should learn about what some of the other stuff does. I don't remember off the top of my head, but the main one you're going to use is next. Okay, let's clear that out. So now, let's do a couple more things. So let's call council.log and we're going to put in here, we're about to call iterator.next. Okay?
Okay.
And let me just comment that out right there, and you'll see what happens. And the other thing is that we're going to call next, and I want to print out what happens. What do we get back? The first result, right?
Right.
Okay. So let's run this. So we're about to call iterator.next. Once we call iterator.next, look, we ran this line of code, right? How do you like that? We called iterator.next right here. We ran this line of code. Now then we got the first result, okay? Also notice, we called iterator.next and this thing is unused right there. There's just nowhere for this to go because it's yield is not going to take any parameters. The parameters you pass into next are what goes on the left side. Are you with me so far?
Yeah. Can we just pass a parameter to the generator?
Sure. Good question. Could we pass a generator to the parameter? So param, and before the line of the call of the generator, okay, param equals param, and I can call this with generator, and I will pass in an object, a:1. Okay, so let's clear this out. Let's run this. Good question. So here's the param as you pass that in. You see this? It just works just like normal. You pass it in, but notice, none of this code, the print statement still didn't run until you called iterator.next. So it is a way you can pass a param in, but nothing happens until you call iterator.next. So you call iterator.next with some value the very first time. The very first time you call iterator.next, you don't pass a value because it's not going to be used. There's nothing to happen. So then what happens is your first result from iterator.next, you get back an object. The result of calling the iterator.next is always an object with the status of whether or not you're done with the value. And the value is whatever yield is on the right side of yield. Whatever is on the right side of yield is a JavaScript expression. This could be the invocation of some function. It could be really any chunk of JavaScript. Notice you don't necessarily have to put this in parens. I don't think it'd be a problem if you put in parens, but typically you see yield, and then there's some JavaScript expression. So what the generator gives back to the controller, the first yield, you see that's my value there. It's very explicit there. So how do you like that, Josias? You with me so far? Any questions?
So the expression to the right of yield
Yep.
becomes the result of iterator.next.
Exactly. And that goes into first result. Whatever is passed on the right side of the yield goes right over to here. And that's what we print out in the value. So you see, this lets us talk to the code. This lets us go back and forth. So let's see what happens now. Let's uncomment another line. Let's call iterator.next again. And let's comment out the beginning print statements so that we don't see those. So let's see, so we're going to comment out the first result since we have that. So the only thing we're going to do now is see what happens the second result. Now what's going to happen this time? We're going to call param for the second time next is called. So where is this value going to go?
I have no idea.
Okay, so whenever you call iterator.next with a parameter, remember it goes over here. Okay, so when you call this param for the second time next is called, it's going to go into that value. Okay?
Okay.
So let's run this bit of code and see if this works. We're still calling that line right there because I didn't comment that out. So second result from the iterator.next is what the controller gave the generator, and the param for the second time next is called. See this? Param for the second time next is called is going to go into what controller gave the generator. You see the first time you called this right there, this parameter is unused. You basically called next. And next did is it basically ran this code up to there and we got back a value. The value that, excuse me, what we did is once we called next, we executed the code up through the yield, and then the control of the code went back to here, and we got the first result. The first result is what the generator gave back to the controller on the first yield. See, our first yield, and that's why I call this variable what the controller, excuse me, this is what the generator gives back to the controller. See, our first result is what the generator gives back to the controller. But now, the param to the, so this should be param to the second yield. What the controller gave the generator. So the param to the second time we call yield right there, whereas that value is going to go in the, it's going to go right here into the second result. This is the second time.
The
So
second time you call
right,
next.
right. The first time right here, this value right there is going to go into the first result. Okay? This value here is going to go in the second result. Do you see? You're going from yield, whatever's on the right side goes into the return value of calling next. And whatever, and then when you call next again, it puts a value in right there. You see how there's a sort of like this place when you call up, you call this and you call next, you just get up to this point in the code. Okay? And then we get this value right here, and then the value goes into the first result, right? And you can verify it from the print statements over here.
Returns the control to the controller.
Right.
Okay, the second time you call next, the generator
It goes up to the next yield.
but
it
doesn't start from here, right?
Well,
it starts
right.
all over
It doesn't. The next time you call next, it just runs one more line and calls yield param to the second yield. Okay, so when you call next again, this value gets filled in the controller. See this? The param for the second time next is called goes right here. So you called next the first time and you just basically got, you would end up getting that thing back over here. See the first result? This goes right here into the first result. Then what happens then is if you call next again, then when you call next again, it goes into there. You understand? The first next, you basically will be evaluating this expression. The second next takes this param and will put it right here. You see, when you call iterator next with a parameter, you're setting the value of whatever that yield calls. You can think about it this way, actually. When you call yield with some expression, you're going to go up to the next call to the iterator, and whatever the value that's whatever the value that's passed in the next call to the iterator will go into here. Is that clear?
Yeah.
So let's just run through this one more time. So we start off, let's put back in here. Yep. And let's comment this stuff out right here. We don't need that comment anymore. Let's just focus on the first call again. So I run this, we're running the controller, we're about to call the generator. We call the generator, and then we're about to call iterator.next.
Okay.
So let's call iterator.next, and we're going to pass in some param, but there's just nowhere for this param to go. Okay? So now, so when we did that, uncomment that out. So when we did that, what we did was we're about to call iterator.next, and now notice here, we ran the code up to this line right there. Okay? And now this could have been an expression too, and you would run whatever's in that expression. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, just for the fun of it, I could just show you that. So first yield param, and I could and then I could say here return and this is what the generator is going to give back to the controller. Okay? So what do you think is going to happen? Now, what are the print statements going to look like, Josias?
First, the first line of the controller function.
We're going to run this one right there.
Yeah. And we start the generator, but
we create the iterator. But we're not going to run this, we're not going to run that line of code until we call iterator.next, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and we're going to call iterator.next, and that's a little bit misleading there, is that we shouldn't actually, there's nowhere for that to go. It's just unused. Okay?
Okay.
So then we're going to get back the first result right there. But let's it's not going to really make sense. So I can show you the first result here. Let's see.
Yeah, but you didn't call the function.
We didn't call the function first yield param. That's good. We're missing it right there. Okay, so we got a yield first yield param. Okay, so let's just make sure that that works the way we expect it to. Okay, about to call iterator.next, and then we call next, and then this happens right there before the line of the generator, right? We got the param, and then first yield param is called. So you see, we ran all the code up to there, and we didn't run a single line more of code. Nothing else happens. So execution basically is stopped right there, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it goes back to
Right, and now let's look at what the first result was. So now the first result from iterator.next is what generator it gives back to the controller on the first yield.
Which is the result of the function.
Right, the result of the function. So do you see how basically by calling next, I'm going to get back the first function call, right? Inside of here. Whatever is on the right side of that yield is going to come back in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next part of it is going to be, now, so then, we're in the controller, okay? So if we're in the controller, I'm just going to put a console.log hello right there. You'll see that that doesn't actually run. There's no hello. We didn't run that line until we call next again. Watch this. Now we called next again, and now we got hello. You see how this is going now?
Yeah.
So now you call next again. We ran that line. Here's our parameter. And now we're going to do we're going to yield the second param to yield. Now, second param to yield, we know it's what the controller gave the generator right there. So let's log what it is. So what controller gave the generator? It's the param for the second time next is called. So this is like basically saying is that, I'm taking this thing and I'm actually creating this string, using that value. And by putting it right there, by calling yield to this, we're going to get that in the second result. Okay? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then the next thing is then, okay, so now what? So let's suppose that we called it a third time. Notice done is false. Okay, let's clear this out and let's do a third time it's called. So the third time done is true and the value is undefined. Right?
Right.
There's no value there. And you're thinking, well, maybe this thing could have a return value, right? Turn, how about that? I'll return a string, and then let's see what happens. So if I return a string, that's the final value.
Okay.
So you see how we're able to communicate between the controller and the generator?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now let's just call iterator.next one more time. And let's just see what happens. So this will be the one at the very bottom. Iterator.
You have some spell error.
Iter.
There's an N iterator.
Iterator, yeah. Let's see what happens. So you get done again and there's no more value. So it's kind of silly that you kind of keep calling it after done. So you see how the iterator can keep calling until done is resolved, until you get to the done part.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so this is all great, but what does this have to do with asynchronous calls, right? What does it have to do with Redux-saga?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've got this example here so you can kind of see some of this stuff. Here's a little picture I sort of drew earlier that kind of shows that, how all this stuff like lines up. The yield star is not very interesting. If you see a yield star, it's basically inlining. So if you call G5 yield star G4, it's basically as if these lines were copied right into there. So I'm not going to go over that example, but this is where it gets really interesting. Whenever you have an async example, let's take a look at the code for that. So in the async example, what happens here is that we're going to call the controller with some myGenerator function. So here's a generator function, and you're going to call the delayed function A, B, and C. And after running all delayed functions, this is what the values are. And these are, then it says done with the sequential async operations. So this is all fine. This kind of sort of looks like what you would do for a Redux-saga function. Is that right, Josias?
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's take a look. This delayed function, what it is, it's going to do a counsel.log after a certain amount of time. And it's going to call some callback you're going to pass into it. And this is the sort of the key thing that the delayed function has to do, is it has to actually call some callback. And the name it's going to pass in there is the name you're passing. It's going to do this after 1 second. So this is in the internals of Redux-saga, or just how the async await works. It works a little bit like this, that there's going to be some delay function call, and there's going to be some callback that's going to run. If you were doing this with a real promise, this callback would be executed in the then part of the promise.
Okay.
So let's run this code. All right, I want to take out these. The one issue that we've got here is that when this JS bin right here, it's printing out these callbacks with a lot of junk. Let's see if it looks better using the console. Let's try putting this on the right. Let's make this all console. And let's turn off this console. That's kind of cool, right?
Yeah.
We might even try to see what happens if we put in a debugger statement, if it works. So let's run this again. And how do I run this again? Keyboard shortcuts. Oh, toggle, close, re-render, clear the output. There we go. Command enter. Okay, so let's run this again. That did not work. Command enter did not work. I'm not sure, actually. So if we do put in console there, we have a run button. I guess I'll do that. Okay. So here we're about to call run. Then we call run. And then we're not going to call done with run. We're going to call, since run is async, we're immediately returning. Okay? And so remember, what run is doing is it's starting the controller. And because what's happening in the controller is it's going to go through here and so why here when you call run, why does it immediately this line of code runs? Well, let's read through the code in the controller. We create the generator, and then what happens is we're going to create a function called the advancer. See, the advancer is a function that takes a response, and the body of this function is going to call iterator.next with whatever response you pass into it, and it's going to return some state. We're going to keep track of the number of times it's called just for the printouts. So this is going to show you that after the iterator is called n times, this is the state. So then if state is not done, then we're going to call state.value in the advancer. Now this is a little weird because normally you think of the value is going to be you think of your value as going to be some just number or string, but in this case the value is actually a function. Now why is the value a function? If we go back here and we look at what delayed function is right there, or excuse me, if you look at what this is doing here, is that delayed func A, when you call delayed func A right there with name, then the callback right there is going to be coming from that value. It's a curried function. So don't let that, so it's critical this is a curried function, and then we're getting the callback in there. So then what's going to happen is just by the fact you're calling this, as a curried function just means that this is, this is going to be, when you execute delayed function, you're going to get a curried function. So that's why you can call state value with state.value, and then you're calling it with advancer. So remember, state.value, let's go through this one more time. State.value is when you call delayed func with A. So Josias, what happens when you call a curried function with only one argument when it takes two arguments?
It returns a function.
Right, that will take
another argument.
Absolutely, and it won't run until you give it the next argument. So what happens is this, is we call yield with the delayed function, that goes back into the controller, and eventually, and then what happens is that go back into the controller here as state. When you call iterator.next, it goes back in there. State wasn't done, you call state.value, you're calling the curried function with the final parameter, right?
Yeah.
So then when you call this, what happens then? You're going to be calling this function right here, set timeout. We're calling the callback, and then at the end of it, we're calling this function right there. And then when it's 1 second is up, it's going to log this, and it's going to call whatever, the next step, the advancer. You see the callback right there is the advancer.
Okay.
So this is how things will happen sequentially right here. When you call yield delayed func, nothing is happening because the advancer is not calling until that delayed func returns. And also notice that the controller right here, this is the part that's literally controlling the code, because it runs it, it's this advancer is sort of the part that's controlling this, because this is the callback, And so each time this happens, the advancer is, the callback is calling the advancer. The callback from calling set timeout will call this advancer. So if you look at the output here, you're about to call run, and then it says these operations run in order. So then we print out the state after the iterator is called, and then you can see right here. Then after we'll be done with the run, the result equals all done but not yet with asynchronous operations. You can see where we print that out.
The last line.
Right here. So how do you like that? The very first time you call iterator.next, we ran this code, right? That's pretty cool, don't you think?
Yeah.
Done was false, and it gave us back a function, right? Where did that function go? It was when we called iterator.next, right? How did we end up calling iterator.next? We called the advancer for the first time with no response value. Remember, when we call iterator.next the first time, do we ever want a response value in there?
No.
We don't want one because it's useless.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, huh? So then we call calling callback A. Okay, so this was the delayed function right there. And you see, we're not going to get to after the first yield is called right there. So we're calling callback A. Right there. And then once that is run, this will be after the first yield is called. You see how this is essentially, we're going back to the controller. Once this thing finishes, iterator.next is called, and then we get back into here, right? And then we could do this a few more times, and every time it'll advance. So then the state after the iterator 2 called, you can look here, done is false, and it's got the function, for the advancer. And I'm not actually printing out the B and the C there until the end. So then we're going to do the same thing a couple more times. And then after calling the 3 delayed functions, A equals capital A, B equals capital B, and C equals capital C. So you can see that's, how did you get, how did you get those values, returned? We pass this value into the delayed function. So this is a bit like how the Redux-saga works, is that you're going to call some delayed function and magically you're going to get back the result of it, seemingly synchronously, right? At some point in the future. You can use that value for whatever, but it could go into the next call you're going to make, and it probably would, if that's the reason you're keeping it in order. So anyway, but then you call another delayed function, you get value for B, maybe another one, you get the value of C. Then eventually you're here after you ran all 3 delayed functions, and then you're done with the sequential operations there. And then here is the state. After you did these calls.
And it's undefined because you're not returning anything in the my generator function.
State after iterator. Where did I do that? Where's that print statement?
Right here.
Oh. There you go. State after the iterator is called that many times. So that was, so what happened is this. Notice the iterator got called one more time. So Josias, why do you think the iterator got called one more time?
After
It sort of goes back to, what is the callback doing when at the very top? You're going to still call the callback, right?
Yeah.
So how does recursion know how to end?
When we're done
Right.
with the state.
You see this? So we end up calling it the final time, and then state is done, and then we don't call it again because there was no actual function there to call. So done is true. How do you like that?
Yeah, it's pretty. Sorry. It's pretty cool actually. We can create several asynchronous calls and make sure they're called in order, so we can use the response of
Yep.
which one of them and
Yep.
pass it to the next one.
All right. So does he feel like you have a better understanding of how Redux-saga is going to work now?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Let's call it a day for now.